All right, let's get started. Welcome, everybody. We are so lucky to have a panel of guests from Koch Industries, which is the second largest private company in the United States. They also happen to be Aggie alumni, so we're really lucky. Today, we'll be discussing interview practices, specifically the STAR or STAR stories, which is one of the best strategies in answering interview questions. So I'm actually going to let each of our guests introduce themselves rather than go through each of you. And if you could just introduce yourself, and as we're going through this video, if you have questions, so anyone that's watching this, if you have questions, you can just put it right in the chat box on YouTube, and we'll make sure to ask our guests those questions. If you have a specific question for a specific guest, then make sure you clarify that in your chat. All right, let's get started. Yeah, if you could each introduce yourself, we'll go from there.
Hey everybody, my name's Spencer Champlin. I wish that we could see you guys right now, so I'm assuming that there are people out there, but if not, I'll just be looking at Nate and the rest of the group here. So like I said, my name's Spencer Champlin. I graduated from Utah State from the business school back in 2015. I studied finance and econ while I was at Utah State, and since I graduated, I've been here at Koch Industries in a handful of strategy and finance type roles, but I'm currently with one of our subsidiaries called Koch Disruptive Technologies, which is our venture capital arm, as an investment associate.
Awesome. My name is McLean Marshall. It's great to be here. I just graduated from Utah State in May of 2020, so not too long ago. I studied management information systems, finance, and economics, and I loved my time at Utah State. Go Aggies. Been here at Koch Industries. I work for Flint Hills Resources. I started about 9 months ago, and I recently just started a new role as a digital transformation analyst. So still trying to figure out what that means, but I've loved it so far. Good to be here.
Hi, I'm Caleb Wilkinson. I graduated, I think, in 2015. My beautiful wife remembers dates for me. But I graduated in information systems from Utah State, my master's degree, and then I came to work for Koch. Had a few roles here now, but currently I lead the data science team for a company called Invista. And yeah, that's me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cody Crowfoot. I just graduated from Utah State in May of 2020. I graduated degrees in accounting and management information systems, and I've been at Koch since graduation. I currently work for Flint Hills Resources in their accounting team, helping out with accounting and automation initiatives within their inventory space.
Great, so that's our team, and as Nate mentioned, there's a chat function on YouTube. We're hoping to get as many questions as you guys have, but in the meantime, we figured that we'd give a little bit of an overview of what the STAR method or behavioral-based interviewing, what it entails, how we as employers go about evaluating candidates using that method, and then we'll get into a little bit more of our experiences as people doing interviews, as well as McLean and Cody are going to give overviews of what it was like for them to go through the interview process, and then we'll get into some more specifics about tips that we have, lessons learned, best practices, kinds of things. But figured I'd kick off with just a brief overview. So behavioral-based interviewing can go by a bunch of different names. I think Nate rattled off 2 or 3 there in the prelude. STAR method is one. We call it SBO, situation, behavior, and outcome. So if we slip up at any point and we start talking about SBO, that's what we're talking about. It's just another another phrase for the same thing, but behavioral-based interviewing overall kind of hinges on the belief that the most accurate predictor of future behavior for individuals is going to be how individuals have behaved in the past. So in our interviews, we try as much as possible to understand the situations that an individual has been placed in, how they interacted in that situation, and what resulted from it. So from the time that we're on the phone with them or they're here on site, we try to understand as much as possible. And usually that entails us asking a lot of in-depth questions. And it's not only the formal interview that goes into our consideration set. It was interesting. I was just flipping back through Good Profit, which is one of the books that our CEO has written. And when he was describing our interview process, he outlined that things as seemingly minute as how a candidate interacts with the receptionist when they're checking in, and if we take them out to lunch, how they treat the servers or the cashiers or whatever it is that they're interacting with. It really matters to us because it can be easy sometimes for people in a very formal interview setting to put on their best face. But for us, we care a lot more about your core values than necessarily what you can show in a 20, 30 minute, however long interview. So anyway, that's hopefully a helpful overview. Then Caleb, do you have any other thoughts on framework for how we conduct interviews?
Yeah, I'll tag on to what Spencer was saying there. The real underlying determination is what values are you using in your day-to-day life, right? So when we talk about situation, behaviors, outcomes, you may have made a wrong choice in the situation, the behavior, the outcome that, you say, hey, I did a bad thing, but that's really not the outcome of that interaction. Isn't really what you look for in these type of situational interviews. It's like, okay, well, what was that value or belief, that underlying attribute that person is tying back to? Because again, in one of the books that our CEO's written, he talks about how changing values and beliefs is much harder than changing actions. And so if you have an action that you don't like, but someone has really good values and beliefs, it's really easy for them to modify and get a different outcome. And so really the belief is as we get good people with good values and principles, then the outcomes will come naturally and you'll constantly go towards the correct decisions for stewardship, for compliance, all those guiding principles that a lot of companies care about, right? Each company has their own set, but normally there's a set of, here's our North Star, this is what we're going for. And so we really use this methodology for helping us understand, where are your values? And again, like Spencer said, we are always, and most interviewers are always watching. It's like, okay, how does this person interact with their friends or their colleagues? When we take them out to dinner, et cetera. We're always watching when we're around, right? It's not like Santa Claus. But some of the questions, I can give you some examples of some of the questions we run through. Because a lot of people, when they come to an interview for a data science job, they think, hey, he's going to ask me, can he code in Python? Can I, make some cool graphics with code? Most of the time, we don't even talk about, in-depth coding practices. We use questions like, tell me about a time where you failed at work, and what was the outcome of that? And so then the interviewee walks us through that occasion, and we'll, in order to get that technical feel for some of those roles, we'll say, tell us about a time you built something or a project that you had to code in, right? We don't normally care about the exact coding paradigms, but the way you approach a problem can tell us how good you are at the actual underlying thing. And so oftentimes people leave and go like, that wasn't what I expected, especially in these situation behavior interviews.
Nate, I noticed that you unmuted for a second. If there was a question you wanted to jump in with.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. So one, how far back is appropriate, would you say, to go for someone in their history? Is high school too far, or is that okay?
I think it's important to know the situation, right? So are you interviewing for a scholarship or some kind of a mentorship program when you're early on in your college career? If you're a freshman or you're a sophomore and that is the most relevant experience that you have, then certainly I think it's fine to go back into high school or whatever it is that that's most relevant. Hopefully, as you're growing in your collegiate career, you're going to be gathering more recent and pertinent experiences. So I think in general, I'd say, rather than saying a hard and fast rule, more recent is preferable, but in as much as we're trying to learn as much about you as possible, having the best answer is going to be more appropriate than having the most recent answer. But yeah, I tend to steer towards recency versus further in the past for a couple of reasons. I think showing growth and maturity and that, you're continuing to have very high valuable experiences would probably be my main reason for saying that.
Okay, one other question is, how do you know what value or belief the interviewer is looking for?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that one, Spencer and team, and then you guys can correct or help me. The underlying answer is you don't know what they're looking for, right? And that's the power of this interview process, because if I say, hey, write this line of code on the whiteboard, you can go write it up there, but it could be memorized, right? And so really what we're hoping for is, tell me of a time. And one thing that I think sometimes we overthink when we're going into these things, it's like, I need a monumental situation or a monumental example of this so that I can be impactful. I remember when I was interviewing, I had poured concrete in past life. I did a lot of construction, and they asked me, when was the last time you problem solved? I told them earlier today, the concrete was drying and we had a problem. And that was my story for my interview. And so it's like, you don't have to go way far back, and it doesn't have to be grandiose. It can be something that's like, hey, this is a time I did this, right? And that will show more of what those underlying values and beliefs are pretty easily. And then you don't have to really worry about what they're looking for. Just answer the question and they'll get to that.
Great, thank you.
I think then if there aren't any other questions in those lines, let's jump over to McLean and Cody and have them tell a little bit about their experience as candidates. And if you want to focus especially on what you learned through the process and what preparation you put in, I think that would be helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, I can speak to that. And I'll try and tie into some of the questions on the chat, as well as some questions that Caleb and Spencer they've answered. The interview experience with Koch was a little bit different than with other companies that I interviewed with. So, for example, I interviewed with Goldman Sachs, and then I interviewed with Koch Industries within, I think, a week when I was trying to find an internship. And when I interned with Koch, the behavioral questions that they asked, a lot of them stemmed more around like who I was as a person and going to more my values. And so I think I want to say that Morgan asked a question of how do you show your core values through, an interview. And I think it's really just being authentic, be who you are. I think sometimes we get super stressed about trying to fit a mold. And I think that's a really terrible approach, because it should be the other way around. Does this company fit my personality and my capabilities, and will it help me grow, right? So that's something to think about. On the preparation side, get out there and practice as much as possible. And when I was interviewing for internships, it was pre-COVID. I was in person. I could be I could use nonverbal expressions a little bit more easily, rather than your guys' experience right now with interviewing via Zoom or conference or video interviews primarily. And so one thing I would say, something that helped me, is practice doing video interviews and then record yourself. We all have a phone, flip it around, record yourself, ask have 6 questions that you're going to ask yourself, see how long it takes you to answer the question, and then sit down and watch it. So I had someone at USU actually do this with me. We did a hire review interview and I recorded it. I didn't watch it yet, and I came in and actually sat down with a counselor, and they watched it with me. And it was horrible. It was terrible. It was probably one of the worst interviews I've ever done, but I got the most feedback from that experience, and it really helped me. It pushed me to see what I was doing wrong. And honestly, it was the STAR method I was just missing. I didn't have good situations. I didn't have good results from the situation. I would go into detail and talk forever, and I wouldn't get to the point. So anyways, do those types of things, but overall practice and do the uncomfortable now rather than be in an interview and feel uncomfortable. So
this is great. One other question, you talked about that preparation, McLean. What happens when they do ask a question that you're not prepared for? They ask for, you can't think of a specific situation. What do you recommend a student do if they're just kind of stumped?
My personal tip is be honest and say, that is a really good question. Give me some time to think. During my interview here on Koch's campus, I had an interview with an individual that asked a very difficult question. And I honestly just said, off the top of my head, I don't have a great answer. And this is the reasoning why. So that's my tip. If you're stumped, don't sit there and spin and get uncomfortable and embarrassed. Just be open and honest. So that's my piece of advice. Cody, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I think in general, my experience with interviewing is they'll value honesty more than just words you can spew out. So if you think you might be able to come up with one, you can ask them to clarify it, or even ask them a follow-up question, see what they mean by the question to give yourself some time. But if you can't come up with something, I think don't just try to come up with a fake answer. But I think to McLean's point, the more you practice interviewing, I think you'll see that you're more ready. Whatever situation, you'll see that you can apply something from your background will fit in.
Just to butt in there a little bit, as someone who's done a lot of interviewing of students for internship positions, this is tangential advice, but similar. One of the biggest pieces of advice I'd give students is to take a moment, whether you feel like you've got a good answer or whether you're really grasping at straws, take a moment, 10, 30 seconds, however long it takes to gather your thoughts versus just jumping to the first thought that comes to your head. I've been in a lot of interviews with students that they won't take any time to gather their thoughts, and they'll get a minute, 2 minutes or longer into answering the question. And then they'll be like, this actually isn't a very good example. Let me go back and use a different example. And that happens. And I think as McLean and Cody are saying, being honest and open is always the best policy. And as we said to begin with, we're trying to find people who are good fits. We're not trying to find people that don't ever make mistakes or can't have, even through the course of the interview, stumble through some things. But just in general, I think you especially are going to feel a lot more comfortable. And then we as interviewers are going to be able to assess your fit and your answer when you're confident, you feel like you're composed, and we can, be recipients to whatever message you feel like is best conveying the point you're trying to make.
I think going on to that, it shows emotional intelligence to take a moment, to take time. I have a really good friend that I've met here in Wichita who was a debate all-star, and I watched him do some interviews. And one thing that he did that stood out to me was he actually thanked the interviewer for that question, said that's a great question, and then paused and thought for a minute and then responded. And I thought that cadence was really nice. So
Great advice. Something that we as career coaches see quite often is students that get caught up in some of those questions that are leading a little bit to the negative, like what's your greatest failure or what's your greatest weakness? and they really struggle answering that question. What tips do you have in regards to those kind of questions?
With those questions, I would turn them into a situation behavior question, right? So what's your greatest failure? Go, well, as human, I fail a lot, but here's a time where I failed, and work through that process with them. Because maybe your interviewer doesn't know that they're looking for these underlying values and beliefs, but that question in of itself is just trying to get at humility and a lot of other aspects. And so it's like, well, tell us of a time you failed, and don't sugarcoat it. If you failed, tell them about it. Within my first 3 months at Invista, I lost $2 million. And I walked into my supervisor's office and I was like, I screwed up. And we talked about it and we fixed the problem. But if that was a big failure, talk about it. It's like, it was all my fault, right? And I couldn't blame anyone else. Walk through it. These are the things I did, and this is what I'm going to do to change it in the future, if anything, right?
I think, Nate, going a little bit further on that question, I think students oftentimes feel like they have to make the negative be a positive and say, like, this is why I'm better than those who struggle with this. And going to what Caleb said, it shows, once again, emotional intelligence and humility to say that you did something incorrectly and to own it. And I think interviewers value that. And so more so than having someone turn a negative into a positive, even if it's dishonest. So.
Well, thank you.
Okay, great. Cody, I think if you wanted to share some of your thoughts on what it was like interviewing.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked a lot about what Koch's interview process is like. It's definitely more of a dialogue than just a string of questions pointed at you. And I think someone asked, how can you know what the interviewer values? I think with Koch specifically, we're very public about the values that all employees are supposed to follow, the MBM principles. And so I think for any company, whether it's Koch or not, seeing if they have published values, I think that's a good place to start. And I think from my experience with behavioral interviews or situation-based interviews is you're never going to know all the situations that you're going to be asked. And I think that was something that was intimidating to me as a student, is I felt like I needed to have, what's a hard teammate story? Have a story prepared for that. What's a failure story? Have a story prepared for that. What's a time you had to work with someone from another culture? Have a story for that. And I think something that helped me as I was approaching these interviews is to realize that all the experiences you have probably hit a lot of these areas. So rather than trying to think of a story to fit an area, think about how these different experiences you have, like what lessons you learn from it. Before I started at Koch, I actually worked for the U.S. Forest Service in firefighting. And, from that experience, I would think, hey, what teamwork lessons did I learn from this? What times did I fail here? And I think, so once the question came, I was experienced approaching it from multiple directions. And I think as you practice more, you'll start realizing that everything you've done in school and beyond, that it'll be easy to answer most of these questions.
That's great. One question, you kind of said that your Koch is very transparent with the values. Would any of you be willing to share maybe a challenging question that you might see in a Koch interview that candidates could prepare for?
I'm trying to think. The questions really aren't that challenging if you think through them. It's like, tell us about this time that you had a success, or that someone else took credit for something that you should have gotten credit for, right? And really, I think some of the tricks, what makes them challenging is your mental state, right? If you're worried, if you're worked up, if you're trying to invent answers, that gets really challenging, because we're trying to dig deep into, okay, what makes you you, and do those beliefs align? One thing that can really help the interview process, like Cody was mentioning, those values and beliefs, the companies most of the time will post them on their websites. My advice would be, don't interview with a company if you don't agree with their values or beliefs, right? Because if you get into that room and they say, hey, these are my values and beliefs, and you're like, well, I don't agree with that, but I want to work for you, that's some conflicting interest, right? And so you can prepare even beforehand by doing your due diligence and going, this really isn't a company I'm interested in because they believe in X. And it's totally fine. There's other companies in the world, right? That's why there's many companies doing many things, is we have options. And so don't put yourself in those situations.
Speaking of maybe things not to do you have any other, I mean, we just have a couple minutes left, but are there any other big no-nos, interview faux pas that you'd want to warn about?
I can try to answer that. I think the biggest one with the STAR method, if you're going to use the STAR method, make sure that you really emphasize the result. I think a lot of times people get going on their situation and the task and the action that they did, and then they stop. And it's like, you went through all of that hard work, you got so far, and then you didn't hit your result. And to me, that's the most important part of the STAR method, is that's the moment where the interviewer can listen to how you interpreted your behavior and the action that you took and what occurred. And so if you cut off too early, then that's a bummer. So that's probably my no-no when it comes to the STAR method.
I would say one of the biggest problems that I run into, and I know others at Koch do, is when people don't talk enough about I. So they'll get into a situation and they'll be like, my team was doing this and we were faced with this problem, or my class was assigned this task, and they go through the whole process and you try to tease out like, okay, so that's what the group was doing, but what were you specifically doing? And it's really common for students to struggle teasing out. And sometimes it's because people don't want to sound arrogant, that, like, I was the one doing this and the rest of the group, was terrible or whatever. I think a lot of times it does come from trying to show genuine humility, but if I, as the interviewer, at the end of the question or at the end of the interview, can't tell what you did versus what your group did, then I really can't place much stock in anything that was said.
And mine's probably more preparation side of things. Don't be in a dark, dank room. I've had a few COVID interviews where it's like, where are you? Where's the person I'm interviewing? And like, the dog was barking in the background. Try and get good internet connection, get someplace where you look nice, dress up, like the same things you do in a normal interview, and go test it like McLean was saying, and see if it looks good. Because if all I can see is a black background, it's very difficult to really get into the interview. And so that preparation really shows a lot to the interviewers, especially during these times of, hey, they care about me spending time with them.
And I'd say that from both parties too, because interviews are so stressful. I think anything you can do to diffuse the stress is really important. So if it's in person, know where you're going, maybe the night before, show up, see where the interview room is, the classroom, whatever it is, so that you're not rushing. If you're unsure what the dress expectations are, check. It can be really uncomfortable for you as a student if you feel underdressed. Show up a little bit early, come with a bunch of questions. That's another, I think, big no-no, is if we get to the end of the interview and I'm like, all right, what questions do you have? And then you've got no idea. It shows that you didn't put a lot of preparation into it. So anyway, anything you can do beforehand to just feel more comfortable and to be more prepared, I think is really important.
Well, I feel like that's the theme of this, is preparation. This has been wonderful advice. We're so grateful that you took the time to share your professional experience. We are promoting an event that's coming up in March or in February 19th, called Mock Interview Day. Maybe some of you participated in that when you were here at Utah State, but this is a chance for our students to get that practice, do that preparation, and hone their skills. And so, is there any last words that you guys would like to share for our students before we end?
I was just going to say, on mock interview day, I participated. I'm not sure if Cody participated, but it was a phenomenal experience. And it really provides you an opportunity to practice in a very low key, low stress environment. And so take advantage of that opportunity. It's really unique. And a lot of those conversations, follow up with them. I think you'd be surprised at some opportunities that could come out of that. So it's a great event.
Yeah, to that. I don't think I was ever hired by anyone I did a mock interview with, but actually every time I go home, I have lunch with the guy that I did the mock interview with. And, that's a good, solid business relationship. I always just check up and we'll go out to lunch, see how his company is doing. And so I think you're not getting a job, but you are building a network, and getting practices. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. We appreciate you coming, and hopefully we'll get to see you all more in person